لكن تحديت الظروف وخضتها وحدي صبورا مستعينا بالصلاة. كم مرة عصف الأنين بداخلي، كم مرة قد ذاق قلبي من أساه محن تمر، وكم كرهت مصابها.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. ما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Forgive me, got a bit of a cold, as everyone is suffering in the UK, as it's December, or almost the end of December. Cold, a lot of viruses, especially when the kids and stuff. So forgive me if I sound a bit croaky, just a bit bunged up. Today's video will focus on the plight of our Syrian brothers and sisters. As the conflict is entering into its 13th year, I think it's 12 or 13, correct me if I'm wrong, 2011 to 14, yeah, so 12 or 13 years. It seems, which it shouldn't, it seems like they've desensitized us to the absolute horrors of the Syrian conflict, which we should never be desensitized to the absolute genocide that's happening and taking place in Bilad al-Sham. And because of Gaza, we are following the developments consistently, religiously, regarding the absolute catastrophic bombardment. Over 20,000 now have been killed by the Zionist regime. So today's segment will focus on the comparison between the Assad occupation of Syria and its similarities to the Zionist regime. Witnessing a hypocritical trend amongst some that are vocal against the Zionist regime, which they should be, and everyone should. But when it comes to the crimes of the Assad regime and its war crimes and its genocide, which has been documented by Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and we'll get into the video and you'll see it firsthand, but they are apologists for the Assad regime. And I'm sitting back thinking, well, hold on here. You've got no morals or principles. Because the Assad family and the regime have slaughtered, imprisoned, forced disappearances, butchered, maybe, and again, I don't know, I have the full statistics, maybe more than the Israeli Zionist regime. But they argue with all sorts of conspiracies, and their moral compass is really deficient. When two intelligent officers, Mark Sykes and I think Francois Picot, the Sykes-Picot agreement, when they sat in a room in Paris, carved up the Ottoman Caliphate amongst themselves, France took control of Syria and the Levant, apart from Palestine, which was under the British mandate. The Alawi were embedded with the French occupiers to the extent that they were awarded an independent state in the coastal areas, Al-Lataqiya, Qardaha, and that particular coastal area of Syria. So as you can see on screen, got a signed document on the 31st of August 1920, and this was signed by Gauroud, which basically gave a state to the Alawis. And as you can see, it mentions, I can't read my French, something to territoria des Alawites. Okay, so it gave them an independent state. For about 3 years, this particular state was working hand in hand with the French occupiers. They were embedded with the French colonizers and they supported them logistically, militarily, and whatnot. Now, the revolt between 1925 and 1927, that particular revolt did not really go down well with the French. Fast forward to World War II, France had its own struggles against Nazi Germany. They were occupied by Nazi Germany, couldn't really maintain the mandate that they had in the Middle East, so they withdrew in 1946. Correct me if I'm wrong. 1946. Now, the Alawite coastal states were then incorporated into the independent Syrian state. So fast forwarding now, the Syrian Arab Republic was formed. The Ba'ath Party grew. Michael Aflaq and his ideas of, Arab nationalism started to spread to Iraq and to Syria. So in the early 60s, the Ba'athists took control. Later on, There was a power struggle. And in the 70s, after the Six-Day War, Hafez al-Assad, who was a air pilot in the military, seized power. Okay? And that started the Assad Alawi Nusayri control of or occupation of Syria. Hafez al-Assad ruled with an iron fist. And during his reign, he perpetrated so many massacres, no different to what his son is perpetrating today. Now, as you can see on screen, we've got human slaughterhouse, mass hangings and extermination at Saydaniya prison in Syria. Okay, this is one of the reports I'm going to use, but it will also connect to other reports as well. Now, let's go into the background. Okay, number 3. Detention-related violations by the Syrian authorities. Syrian government forces arbitrarily arrested, forcibly disappeared and tortured detainees in their custody for decades. Between 1980 and 2000, the government of former President Hafez al-Assad was responsible for the enforced disappearance of an estimated 17,000 individuals in Syria. Now, come back to me now. To add, this regime built its foundations on the back of torture, mass disappearances, and genocide and massacres. Hafez al-Assad perpetrated so many crimes against the Syrian people, no different to the Israeli Zionist regime against the Palestinians. As you can see on screen, we've got Human Rights Watch, and they list so much violations perpetrated by Hafez al-Assad. So we got the disappearances in Deir az-Zor on April the 15th, 1980. After teenage demonstrators set fire to the local Ba'ath Party headquarters, police rounded up 38 youths in the eastern city of Deir az-Zor. Though none were charged with the crime, they soon disappeared from the local jail. Parents have never learned their fate. Continue. Tadmur prison, June the 27th, 1980. When Islamists were blamed for a failed assassination attempt on Hafez al-Assad, government troops entered communal cells at the notorious prison and fired indiscriminately on the prisoners inside. More than 1,000 prisoners were killed. What's the difference between the Israeli Zionist regime and the disgusting, filthy occupation by the Alawi Nusayri Assad family? Sarmada, July 25th, 1980. For reasons that remain unclear, security forces rounded up hundreds of residents from the northern village of Sarmada for interrogation and beating. Some 40 villagers were killed or disappeared. Hama, 1981. After a government checkpoint was attacked outside the city of Hama, soldiers sealed off the city and began house-to-house searches without so much as an identity check. Hundreds of men and boys were dragged outside, shot. At least 350 people were killed. What did I say about them ruling with an iron fist? And then the worst of them all, the Hama uprising and repression, February the 2nd to March the 5th, when government commandos entered Hama to round up opposition members. Islamist fighters resisted, barricading themselves in their old city and killing 100 government and party representatives. The government responded with a fierce bombardment that destroyed much of the city. Troops rounded up and executed hundreds of civilians in total. Between 5,000 and 10,000 people were killed. The report documented by Amnesty International post-2011, meaning after the Syrian revolution, we're going to go into that in great detail. Just be patient with me. The pattern of Hafez al-Assad and his aggressive policies, mass disappearances, slaughter, as per the famous slogan that they use, Al-Assad or Nahruq al-Balad. Assad or we'll burn the country. And this is exactly the motto that they use. The human rights abuses perpetrated by Bashar al-Assad comes of no surprise to us. Comes of no surprise. Because historically, his father set the benchmark on how to deal with opposition. Or any opposition, in fact. What I find staggering and strange is that many supporters of the Palestinian cause whitewash the Assad regime, citing conspiracy theories, and their defense of Bashar is somehow connected to Bashar's opposition to the Zionist regime. Whereas in fact, Bashar has slaughtered in the 13 years or 12 years of the Syrian war more than Israel or the Zionists have perpetrated in probably the last 30, 40 years. Easily. I think estimations 400,000, 500,000, if not a million, have been killed by the Assad regime. So as you can see on screen, we've got the European Centre for Constitutional Human Rights dossier, human rights violations in Syria, tortured under Assad, the fight against impunity for state torture in Syria, German authorities set international precedent. So we got the introduction. President Bashar al-Assad's government is responsible for numerous war crimes and crimes against humanity, especially for the systematic torture of political dissidents and activists. Not only since the peaceful protests in 2011, bear that in mind, peaceful protests, but for decades. Those responsible for crimes have nothing to fear at home. Impunity in Syria is nearly absolute. Systematic torture of civilians in armed conflict is a war crime and crime against humanity. The international community must defend the absolute prohibition of torture, including in armed conflict. If victims do not see justice, there will be no political solution to the conflict. As you can see in the introduction. However, the Human Rights Council established the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Syrian Arabic Republic or Arab Republic in August 2011 in Resolution S-17/1. The Commission has mandate to investigate all alleged violations of international human rights laws in Syria since March 2011. And here we got Resolution S-17/1. It is for you. If anyone wants to read it, I'll leave it on screen for about 10 seconds. Now, as you can see, we've got torture by Assad's intelligence services. You have to remember, even prior to the revolution in 2011, the Assad regime was notorious. You have his Shabiha and various Mukhabarat wings systematically suppressed the rights of the Syrians. So as you can see on screen, it mentions the enforced disappearance and torture of government critics, opposition politicians and journalists has been a common characteristic of Assad's rule for decades. Those cheerleaders for the Syrian regime then trying to champion the Palestinian cause, you're hypocrites. You're absolute hypocrites. These practices are well known and documented in Syrian torture survivors and activists' testimony. Add investigations by international human rights organizations such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. No, I'm going to present the human slaughterhouse, the Saydania prison. Continues. Syria's 4 intelligence services, the Air Force Intelligence Service, who was part of the Air Force? Hafez al-Assad, al-Mukhabarat al-Jawiyya. The Military Intelligence Service, al-Mukhabarat al-Askari, or Askariya, meaning the Military Intelligence Service. The Political Intelligence Services, al-Aman al-Siyasi. Then you got the General Intelligence Services, al-Aman al-Am. Then you've got, and the National Intelligence Services, the Al-Aman Al-Watani, which oversees the others, practice widespread systematic torture. Each agency has a central branch in Damascus as well as regional branches. All intelligence services are well equipped in terms of staff, and prisons are located all over the country. Detention facilities are set up as interrogation prisons where detainees are tortured regularly with various techniques. According to survivor testimony, this includes beating with sticks, cables and plastic tubes, kicking heads and genitals, electric shocks, sleep deprivation and sexual assault. The Assad government maintains its claim that interrogations are a means to obtain confessions. In reality, the system of torture does not serve to obtain information, but to terrorize and humiliate the population. Okay, continuing on. The Syrian government continues to deny the occurrence of these crimes and refuses to allow international experts or journalists to cross intelligence services prisons. Testimony from torture survivors working with ECCHR, meaning the European Centre, what's it called again? The European Centre, I'm going back again, hold on. The European Centre for Constitutional Human Rights. Okay, so I have to scroll all the way back. Okay, then he mentions corroborates research and documentation of international Syrian human rights organizations. For example, the Syrian defector known as Caesar provided Human Rights Watch with more than 50,000 photos. And we're going to show you some. Caesar worked as an official Syrian military police forensic photographer. He took the pictures between the May 2011 and August 2013 at the height of the peaceful protests. Okay, then eventually the FSA etc. They show at least 6,786 detainees who died inter alia from torture, either in detention or after their transfer from prison to a military hospital. Amnesty International report that between September 2011 and December 2015, between 5,000 and 30,000 people were secretly hanged in Saydania military prison. Okay, now come back to me now. We're going to go into the report now from Amnesty International. So those defenders of the Syrian regime, 5,000 to 30,000 dead in Saydana prison. The Mukhabarat, the 4 or 5 intelligence services who were systematically torturing, placing fear in the hearts of the Syrians, forced disappearances for decades. What is the difference between the Israeli Zionist regime with their war crimes and barbaric practices and the Assad regime, the Nusayri Alawi regime, since the time of Hafez al-Assad? And we've read Human Rights Watch, we've read Amnesty International, we've read the European Centre, going back now, this is so long, the European Centre for Constitutional and Human Rights, the dossier, human rights violations in Syria. Yet you're championing the Palestinian cause, but yet you're defenders and sympathisers to the Assadist regime. Where are your principles? Where are your mabadi? The Amnesty International report, hanging and extermination at Saydana prison. It mentions, introduction, between December 2015 and December 2016, Amnesty International conducted research on violations of human rights and international human rights law taking place at Saydana military prison. It is found that since 2011, listen to this, thousands of detainees held in Saydana's Red Building have been killed in extrajudicial executions. Under international law, extrajudicial executions are unlawful and deliberate killings carried out by order of a government and with its complicity or acquiescence. The organization's findings address when, how, and where the executions are carried out, and the scale of executions at Saydania since 2011. I don't know whether I'm pronouncing it Saydania or however it's pronounced. In the course of its investigation, Amnesty International has also documented the torture and inhumane treatment of detainees held in Saydania's Red Building. It is found that they and other detainees in government-run detention centres have been subjugated to the crime against humanity of extermination, defined by the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court as the international infliction of conditions of life, inter alia, and the deprivation of access to food and medicine. Look at this. Calculated to bring about the destruction of part of a population. And you could go into the Roman Statute of the International Criminal Court, 1998, the links at the bottom. According to our findings, since 2011, the Syrian government has purposefully inflicted inhumane conditions on detainees in its custody in a calculated effort to kill them. Carrying on. As you can see, you got satellite images of mass graves at Najha, Syria. Mass graves. They slaughtered so many since the war. As you can see, you've got a cemetery here. And then you've got another one, new graves, and they're just piling on top because they are systematically executing extrajudicial killings by the Syrian regime. So as you can see, you've got some detainees who have been released. Look at the before pictures and look at the after. They are barely recognizable. Absolute torture, even lack of food and water. Look at the testimony by Umar As-Sughri, the one on the top right. As you can see, look at him, you can't even recognize him. He says that then the water stopped. The thirst was indescribable. It was the summer. We will sometimes pour a bucket of water mixed with cleaning chemicals into the cell to control the bad smell. After the drinking water stopped, we will wait by the little window in the door, which they usually poured this cleaning water through and try to drink it. We will lick the condensation from the wall. This is the crimes that have been committed by the Syrian Assad Alawi Nusayri regime. We got another report. We're going to go back to human slaughterhouse. Physicians for Human Rights. Syria attacks on doctors, patients and hospitals. Okay? And it mentioned the Syrian government has responded to popular protests with months of sustained and extreme violence and intimidation and an all-out assault on the country's medical system. PHR's documented attacks on Syrian medical professionals, and they killed one of our brothers, Allah Yarhamu. Forgot his name now. They killed him in prison as well, one of the British doctors. Violations that are but one aspect of the myriad abuses the Syrian people have endured over the past several months. And it's clear they martyred our brother because he would have presented the truth. So it's not surprising when they martyred our brother. I'll get his photo up. I don't know his name now. I'll get it when I edit the video. Allah yarhamu. May Allah accept him as one of the martyrs. The attacks on Syrian medical community are alarming. PHR received evidence that government forces deny wounded civilians impartial medical treatment. Does that remind you of the Zionist regime? Yes, it does, doesn't it? Invade, attack and misuse hospitals. Oh, does that not remind you of the Zionist regime? Of course it does. Attack and impede medical transport and detain and torture doctors for treating wounded civilians. Oh, it reminds me of a Zionist regime. Definitely reminds me of them. I'll place the reports in the description. You can read them for yourselves and you would see that there is no difference between the Zionist Israeli regime and the Assadist Alawi Nusayri monsters. No difference between the two. So, conclusions and recommendations. Let's read. As this report demonstrates, Saydania military prison is a human slaughterhouse. Let's say that again. Saydania military prison is a human slaughterhouse. The body of Saydania's victims are taken away by the truckload. Many are hanged secretly in the middle of the night. Others die as a result of torture. And many are killed slowly through the systematic deprivation of food, water and medicine and medical care. It is inconceivable that this is not authorized by the highest levels of the Syrian political leadership. Over the course of 12 months, Amnesty International conducted extensive investigations into these crimes and interviewed a wide range of witnesses. It is found that these practices have been perpetrated as an attack against the civilian population. No difference to the Zionists, pursuant to a state policy that has been widespread as well as systematic. These crimes therefore amount to crimes against humanity. Crimes against what? Humanity. Any delays will have lethal consequences. When asked whether the executions are still ongoing, a former prison official responded, "Of course the executions, it will not stop. If people are still going into prison, there is still torture. If there is still torture, there are confessions. If there are still confessions, there are executions." And this interview was taken place on the 6th of October 2016. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to play a Palestinian refugee who left Palestine due to the Israeli Zionist occupation, moved to Damascus, and due to the Syrian crimes, he had to then also migrate again to northern Syria.
بالتزامن مع القصف الإسرائيلي على قطاع غزة، سنلتقي الآن مع العم المهجر من قبل الاحتلال الإسرائيلي من فلسطين، والمهجر أيضا من الاحتلال الأسدي الروسي الإيراني من جنوب سوريا. السلام عليكم.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله. الله يسلمك. الحمد لله.
احكي لي كيف عم تتابعوا هلا أحداث غزة؟
والله عم نتابع عبر الجوال، عبر وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي، على الفيس، على التيك توك، على وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي، قناة أورينت، قناة العربية نت، عبر القنوات على الجو. مهجر قسرا من جنوب دمشق مثل ما تفضلت وحكيت إلى الشمال السوري. فنحن تهجرنا، هربنا من القصف، وهربنا من دمار البيوت، وهربنا من دمار المساجد، وهربنا من دمار المشافي.
شو الفرق بين الاحتلال الإسرائيلي والاحتلال الأسدي والروسي والإيراني؟
لا فرق. تنوعت الأماكن والأزمنة والعدو واحد. آلة القصف الإسرائيلية ما فرقت على آلة القصف الروسية في سوريا، ما فرقت على قصف الميليشيات الشيعية في سوريا. الذبح الإسرائيلي في غزة وبأراضي وجغرافيا الفلسطينية ما فرق على ذبح وانتهاكات الميليشيات الشيعية يلي اجت تقتل بالشعب السوري وتنكل بالشعب السوري باسم تحرير فلسطين وباسم القدس، والقدس منهم بريئة. وينهم من دورهم؟ وين دورهم من فلسطين؟
So you heard the Muhajir who left Palestine due to the Zionist occupation, went to Damascus, the Mukhayma Yarmouk, which was the famous refugee camp in or outside of Damascus. They starved them. Everyone knows the events that took place. So those apologies for the Assad regime, building on their support because of the conspiracies, etc. The harsh reality is the Assad regime and the regime in Syria have perpetrated worse crimes than the Israelis. If you want to argue, okay, not worse, okay, on par then, what's the difference? So your outrage is selective. Your connection to standing up for the unjust and standing up against oppression and standing with those who are oppressed, but yet you support the Assad regime who have been perpetrating human rights abuses from 2011 and even from his father since the 1980s. So seriously, don't see any benefit from your fake tears. All I see is hypocrisy. All I see is double standards. And the harsh reality is that there is no difference between the Assad, Alawi, Nusayri regime and the Zionist regime who have occupied Palestine. So take care of yourselves. وصلى على نبينا محمد.
ليس الغريب غريب الشام واليمن، إن الغريب غريب اللحد والكفن، إن الغريب له حق لغربته على المقيمين في الأوطان والسكن. سفري بعيد وزاد لن يبلغني، وقوتي ضعفت والموت يطلبني. ما أحلم الله عني حيث أمهلني، وقد تماديت في ذنبي ويسترني. تمر ساعة